Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 41 of Lore Lords Nintendo Part 2. I've been loving this one because, one, I know a little bit about it, so I can add my 2 cents here and there, but two, because I am a simp for Nintendo. I'm oftentimes very, anti-corporate, but, Nintendo, I'm like, shill, let's go, I'll buy all your shit. So, I love this company.
I'm going to wear Nintendo shirts. I'm going to wear Nintendo hats. I'm going to wear Nintendo shoes. Maybe?
I haven't had the shoes yet, but I've had hats and shirts of Nintendo so far, yes.
I bet they did some collaboration at some point for shoes.
I'll get my Zelda shoes for sure. I'll get them.
There's probably
I'll get my Sheikah kicks.
Nintendo Nikes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they have little Sheikah things on the pull tags.
They're big, giant Mario. They just look like Mario's brown loafers. That's just what they are. They're Nike brand loafers.
Yeah, that'd be funny though. See, Nintendo, why don't you hire a couple of these guys?
Sponsor?
Right, we got some ideas.
Just imagine an ad placement for Nintendo right now.
Right, I am.
Don't forget to subscribe for Nintendo Power. Oh.
Wow, dude, bring Nintendo Power back.
Yeah, seriously.
Even though magazines are one of the most obsolete articles of media that we have, they're still at stores. I don't understand. Okay, anyway, we're getting off topic.
There's a lady I work with, and she gets magazines delivered to the office for her.
So weird.
And one of them is
so weird.
Is Vogue and Vogue Paris, which is so wild to me. That someone I looked it up and I'm like, why? I had to. I was like, how do you actually read magazines? So I started looking into it, and Vogue's the top seller by a mile. So I guess that's what it is. But I looked into it, and all the pages are ads. It's 100% ads, I guess, which makes sense for what it is. It's just a book of clothing ads. But then there's a couple articles, but 99% of the pages are ads, and they're just QR codes.
Oh my god!
They don't even say what they're advertising.
That's just a waste of fucking paper.
I know.
My God,
that's what magazines are nowadays. It's just websites in physical form.
Yeah. I knew Vogue was a big deal because it's people post about it on Twitter all the time. Apparently they had a really uncouth thing recently about something or other. I don't actually remember, but they made some serious issue look not serious. Oh, the Ukraine war, right?
Yes. I do know about that.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about.
No, it's not what we're talking about.
But it's an interesting topic.
Yeah, it is. Magazine, Lord. Let's go. Number one, I think it was Vogue Paris, then Gentleman's Quarterly, then Vogue. That was the top 3 magazines. It was something weird like that. No, tonight we're doing Nintendo Part 2.
Yeah, let's go, baby.
Which is great. We're gonna, I guess we can just jump kind of right into it. Last time we ended at the end of the 80s, but I'm going to backpedal a little bit to the mid-80s to go more in-depth.
Flashback.
Yeah, flashback to a little bit more in-depth about during the NES launch time. Because we didn't really I just kind of was out of time, so I wrapped it up, just wrap it. So now we're going to go back a little bit. We're going to step into the 80s. Last time we went over how Nintendo was a company from 1889 that made playing cards, and their whole journey through the 1900s up into the 80s, where they finally launched the NES.
Let's go.
What we know them for, You could say, let's go. Anyway, the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System, came out in 85. It was in full swing. Everyone loved it. Huge in America. And after it came out, it pretty much dominated the market. The other consoles, the Atari 2700 or 7600? 7600. I think 7600 was the one. Yes. Atari 7600. Other ColecoVision, stuff like that. They were pretty much already not popular in America. So when the NES kind of came out, that was the only console around. And the Master System was okay. The original Sega. It had a presence, but not really. But soon after its launch, in the same year, even 85, Rob already had kind of been stopped. It became a thing of the past. It pretty much got forgotten because the NES.
Just learning about Rob and how fast he got dropped off because once you had the gaming system, that was really all you needed.
Yeah, Rob kind of was the launch tool to put it into toy markets and stuff, and people were like, "Oh, cool! It's like a robot toy." And then it got less popular for that and became the NES. Once people actually realized what it was and how cool the NES was, it went back to just being the NES. That's what people wanted to buy it for.
Fine with me.
Yeah. So it would be very high demand, and it would show up even in electronic stores, which remember we talked about last time how they like changed all the words to not be in electronic stores. They could be in toy stores.
Yeah,
They ended up being successful enough that electronic stores bought them anyway, and they started selling consoles again. Specifically like Best Buy. When the NES launched its to high success in '85, they had a warehouse manager for Nintendo of America whose name was Howard Phillips. And he teamed up with their marketer named Gail Tilden, and they operated a small consumer feedback campaign. And what this would be is when you would buy an NES game, it would have a little card in it, like a consumer feedback card, right? And you would fill it out with, it had a return mailing address on it to the warehouse, and you could put your name and like your address and your phone number or whatever, write what you thought about the game and Nintendo in general, and send it back to them. So with these cards, Phillips ended up building a large database of names and addresses for people who sent them back.
Right.
And he had hundreds of thousands of names of people all over the country. And so what he did with this information is he began a free of charge gameplay advice hotline at Nintendo of America, which is kind of famous now. People look back on it because it's a wild concept. And this would be a hotline you could call for help when you were stuck on a game or wanted to know about anything coming up. Like you could call them and ask about like upcoming release dates for games if they knew them yet. They would tell you, kind of thing.
Hell yeah.
Because there was no internet back then. And Phillips thought it was a great idea to get the American public like more involved in Nintendo's workings and figuring out how they work, so they did it. Sure. And this hotline is, like I said, it's kind of famous now because it was such an outlandish and like novel concept. And I remember as a kid, even on like Super Nintendo games, seeing on the back like the Nintendo hotline number, like stuck, call the hotline kind of thing.
That's so funny.
This is only in America, by the way, not Japan. This Nintendo of America did this, which was the majority of sales. So I guess it's just a lot of things we're going to talk about in this episode are going to be just Nintendo of America, for clarity's sake, because they're the biggest part of Nintendo.
Yeah.
So when it started in '85, they had 5 or 6 consultants on staff at all times to help callers. So these people were like experts, like, oh, you're stuck in ghosts and goblins, like let me show you where to go, kind of thing. Like they would tell you. So that was kind of cool. That'd be a cool job, I guess.
Right.
So a quote from Phillips states, he said, quote, "When we launched the NES in 1985, we figured out very quickly that kids were just dying to get extra information, not just about new games that were coming out, but tricks on how to play them." So in 1987, 2 years later, Gail Tilden started to open up something called the Nintendo Fun Club. And she made Howard Phillips the club president of the Nintendo Fun Club. So he was Nintendo Fun Club president. She was the manager of Nintendo Fun Club. And they launched this with a publication called Nintendo Fun Club News.
Okay.
And this was a 10 to 20 page magazine and newsletter. And their first issue would be delivered quarterly, starting in 1987, to people whose addresses were in the database. They didn't even charge them. They just sent this out. And you'd get this magazine, and it had... It had, people loved it. It had screenshots of games. It had advertisements for new coming games. It had advertisements for Nintendo events. It had showing like this is what's coming, stuff like that. But the biggest thing was the tips and tricks VHS that came along, and you can watch these on YouTube. They're pretty hilarious. They're so of their time, and it's just like that. These are things that they're so rare nowadays too. So that's a collector's item if you got one of those Fun Club VHSs. But they would have a whole VHS with like sometimes like anything from 25 minutes to like 45 minutes of like game footage. Like here's how you get to this area. Here's how you can get to the end of World 3-3 from World 1-1 in Mario, like that kind of thing, Like they would show you stuff like that, and there'd be this really boring guy narrating it. It was hilarious.
Early Let's Plays.
Yeah, basically. So this is, and like kind of like you just said, pre-internet. There's no way to Google search like how do I get to the end of Mario? Like why can't I do this kind of thing? So they had people had to figure it out on their own, which is why this became so popular. And not only that, but you remember what it's like to be a kid and wanting to be the only one who knows the secrets.
Oh, of course.
And the tips and tricks.
Everybody knows everything now, so I'm just going to shut up and, listen.
Yeah. But like back then it was like, hey guys, I know how to get to the end of 1-1 from 3-1, kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
So that made it even more popular with kids. They had to be part of the Fun Club. And with a name like Fun Club, I guess who wouldn't? So their first year was quarterly issues, like I said, and they would release 3 more issues after the initial 4, which would actually be bi-weekly instead of quarterly. But then it got discontinued.
Bummer.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like a precursor to Nintendo Power.
So when it was discontinued, it had 600,000 people on the mailing list.
That's a lot still.
And they had risen to 100 telephone gameplay counselors on staff. Philip and Tilden wanted to expand this project, and Nintendo HQ really caught on to see that this free magazine wasn't really cutting it anymore. It was becoming too large of a thing to just do for free as for fun, So Nintendo HQ in Japan, seeing how successful it was, they encouraged Tilden and Philip to go forward with this project, and they would remake it into a full subscription-based magazine and rename it, you guessed it, Nintendo Power.
Oh, called it what?
Yeah, I know. Big surprise.
Like I knew.
Nintendo Power, which I was a subscriber as a kid, Nintendo Power.
Oh, yeah.
I actually asked my brother if he had any left, because he has some of our old strategy guides and stuff, and I wanted to see if he had any left, and he checked. Unfortunately, he doesn't, which is really sad, because we had over a decade of them. So, I wish we had them.
The Lego magazine delivered to me.
Wow. Did you get Nintendo Power?
I did later on. But then by the time I was getting it, it was starting to get not as popular. So it was still around for a while, though.
Yeah, we actually had it till 2006 or something. We had it for a long time.
We had it for a while too.
I remember I was in high school and they still got delivered. So yeah, this would be Nintendo Power, right? We love Nintendo Power. It's popular. The first issue was sent to 600,000 Fun Club members for free. And it was also, nice. They sent it to everyone with notices saying hey, Fun Club's gone. We're changing it to this. You have to subscribe. Here's your subscription card. If you want to do it, mail it back, kind of thing. And it would also be sold on shelves in U.S. and Japan.
Yeah.
And this would be extremely successful. And they flew off the shelf. It actually sold 3.6 million copies when it came out.
Nice.
So yeah, that's a lot of paper being sold. And this is including the free one sent to the Fun Club members, by the way. So they sold 3 million on the shelf, which is a lot. Yeah.
It's still a lot, yeah.
Yeah. So it not only focused strategy and news, but it also introduced reviews of games. Nice. As well as images with full maps of games. There's one of the most popular ones is the Mega Man issue, where you can see the whole map of 3 stages, posted. Which is kind of cool, I guess, to know what to do. And back then you were just kind of you didn't know what was coming, so you could actually kind of prepare yourself, which is neat. So it also had first-party advertisements only, which is a crazy magazine concept. I think it always did. I don't think they ever had ad space in Nintendo Power. It was pretty much always just Nintendo ads.
Yeah, I don't remember anything else.
Yeah, and so that's a crazy idea nowadays. But yeah, you get Nintendo Power, you would only see ads for upcoming games and upcoming Nintendo events, like tournaments or whatever,
That's the perk of being an exclusive thing, It's Nintendo doesn't need to share in any other IP because it's Nintendo.
Yeah.
So they're just that. They're that big.
Yeah, especially during the NES times, they were the giant. They controlled the gaming industry.
Yeah.
So the rise of the popularity of Nintendo Powers across homes in America did nothing but solidify Nintendo as a top dog in the 8-bit console era. In 1989, Gunpei Yokoi, the guy we talked about last time who made the Game & Watch, he had risen to become the chief engineer at Nintendo. And he had a meeting with Hiroshi Yamauchi, the president, and we talked about them last episode, so listen to part 1 if you want to learn more about their lives. He told Yamauchi he could make a handheld Game Boy console, based around the NES, that would be unlike the still popular Game & Watch. It could switch cartridges. So we know it as a Game Boy now, but that wasn't what it was called originally. And the ability to switch games with the NES was a crazy concept, Nintendo. But they're if you can do it, go for it. So he gave it the green light to make the project, and it was called the Dot Matrix game system.
That's pretty cool, but that's such a nerdy name. Like,
Yeah,
nerd.
it doesn't sound terrible, like Dot Matrix. You know what I mean? Like that sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, but it's like, all right, again, it's just like, all right, nerd. Like,
yeah,
Game Boy. It's like, yay.
The reason he called it that is because it had a Dot Matrix display as opposed to segmented LED display, which is what the Game & Watch had. But that's why they were locked to a single game. So the Dot Matrix display, it was able to refresh the display feed and show new content. And this screen would be difficult to see with black and white graphics at points, so it actually had a contrast slider to let you fix that if you want to. During the development of the Dot Matrix game system, a developer who's a legend today and one of my favorite of all time, Shigesato Itoi, visited Nintendo headquarters to attend a meeting about his upcoming game to the NES, Mother, known today as Earthbound Beginnings. So he was visiting Nintendo, talking about Mother, and during the meeting, he toured the area, and they're like, hey, come check out this project we're working on. It's a handheld system called the Dot Matrix. And he met with Yokoi, and they were talking about it for a while, and he said to him, this is just a small version of the NES, right? And he said, almost. It's almost as powerful, it just can't do color. And he's like, oh, well, if the NES is a man, this is kind of like a Game Boy. And so Yokoi loved the idea of calling it that, and so Itoi was the guy who came up with the name Game Boy, and Yokoi kept it, and they actually had a meeting about it right after, and everyone else in the meeting hated it. They said it was a horrible name. Funny. They said it would never take off. They said people didn't want to have things associated with them called Boy. They were like, it was too childish, right? And it even got the nickname Dame Game in their interior office, which in Japan translates to useless or hopeless game.
Jeez, all right.
Yeah, so, The next step in that development was an entrepreneur named Hank Rogers, who's pretty famous today for this, actually. He would visit Nintendo because he was the sole rights holder to a game called Tetris.
Ooh.
And he would try to sell it to Nintendo of America, and he would end up convincing them that it would be a great idea to do so, and what Nintendo thought is this would be perfect for their new system of development, the Game Boy. So it could reach a wider audience around, and Hank agreed and sold the rights to it. That's why Nintendo now, still to this day, makes Tetris games.
Yeah.
Yokoi loved the puzzle game, and he decided it would be the perfect game to bundle in box with the Game Boy, so that when you bought the console, you'd already have a game with it that anyone could pick up and play.
That's genius marketing.
Yeah, and so the system would end up being released in 1989 in Japan, and in America in July of 1989, with Tetris in the box.
Hey.
They would spend $10 million advertising the Game Boy, especially Nintendo Power. And when it was released, the first reviews would shame it, saying it was terrible. Oh. They would say that this thing has a black and white display, which, compared to the only other handheld at the time, the Atari Lynx, had a full color display.
Oh.
However, it did have some praises, which in the end won out for the system, because the Game Boy lasted 5 times as long on batteries than the Lynx did, as well as having a price point that was a third the cost of the Lynx. This thing sold for $189 at launch.
Oh, that's much better.
When the Lynx cost $350. So,
Jesus.
Yeah, it was.
That's wild. It would cost probably $5 today.
Yeah, well, so they actually ended up lowering the price to $99. So it became $99 to get a Game Boy only a couple months after launch. So they were super cheap, and you could just get these things. And there was plenty of them. They would end up selling 300,000 units in Japan, and they would sell out in the first week. And when 400,000 got sent to America, they sold out in the first day.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. So not only is there more Americans to buy your product, but the advertisement of how good it was doing in Japan was already reaching America. So people were putting them on hold in electronic stores to their kids.
Hell yeah, that's awesome.
So last episode I mentioned Super Mario Bros. 3 and how it was the highest selling game in the world for like fucking ever.
Yes.
And it would reach 18 million copies sold eventually. That would be the last major first-party release for the NES, and that came out in the year 1990. The popularity of Super Mario Bros. 3 was so vast that it even spawned the Super Mario Bros. Super Show, that we love to meme about this today, but back then it was really popular. And this show was made by DIC, or Dick Entertainment, and Viacom Enterprises. The show was a product of capitalizing off the success of the game, which kids in America clearly adored because they bought so much of it, and the show did very much succeed at first. The first season of the show had extremely high ratings, especially with children. And it really also drove home Mario as a household name in America.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, that was like the nail in the coffin. If there was to be a main game mascot that people recognized, that was it. Mario was settled. But now that we're done with the 80s, we're finishing up the 80s, we're going to have to go back into the 80s to undone ourselves. But not to talk about Nintendo, because we have to talk about the competition. That's important for what's coming up. In 1987, NEC Home Electronics and Hudson Soft. Hudson Soft is still around today, I think. I don't think NEC is around anymore. But they would make a product to rival the supremacy of the NES. They would release this console in Japan under the name the PC Engine. And this would be a powerful system hosting much more advanced hardware than the NES for a higher cost, with 16-bit graphics.
Uh-oh.
The hardware was able to produce these graphics with much higher graphical fidelity, being 16-bit. That's what we know for like the next generation, right? So it was much higher graphical fidelity than the NES, and they weren't alone in this either, because Sega would follow suit, and they would release the Sega Mega Drive in 1988, another console capable of hosting 16-bit software, able to show much more advanced graphics and the Mega Drive was a lot cheaper than the PC Engine as well.
Ooh. That competition's really making Nintendo sweat now, baby.
So this was in 1987. So this was pre Mario Bros. 3. So NES still had years to go. Like NES was still going strong. But yes, you're right. Things were starting to get shaken up. Especially when these both, of course, eventually made their way to the United States. The PC Engine would change name to something what you might recognize. I know it. I actually knew some people who had these as a kid. TurboGrafx 16. That's what the PC Engine is known to us.
No, I don't know that.
It was not popular, but I did actually know one person who had one, and I did use one as a kid for a little bit at their house, which is kind of cool.
I have seen one before.
Yeah, it did. This was the end of NEC being like a competitor. They didn't make it in the 90s. The Mega Drive would also come out being called, as you probably guessed it, the Sega Genesis.
I know that, baby.
This was a big deal in the industry, as games now were being accepted and expanding rapidly with the new companies. Yamauchi stated he was in no rush to develop a new console when these came out publicly.
That's some big balls on
That's some big balls.
Yeah,
and then literally months later, Nintendo's market dominance slipped. And it slipped fast to the Sega Genesis.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're
Basically, that's exactly what happened. So on September 9th of 1987, Yamauchi would reveal the development of the Super Famicom in the newspaper Kyoto Shimbun, and he would also announce in a 1988 interview with Touch Magazine that they were developing games for it, such as Super Mario Bros. 4 and Dragon Quest 5. And he projected 3 million units to be sold upon its release. In 1988, in November, we saw the first press showing of the console, and it received great reviews.
Ooh, yeah.
Masayuki Umera, who designed the Famicom, would once again be leading the design for the Super Famicom, and it would end up releasing to Japan's public on November 21st of 1990. It was an instant success, selling their initial 300,000 shipments in hours.
Nice.
Which actually resulted in a massive social disturbance in Japan. The Japanese government ended up having to contact Nintendo, asking them to only release consoles and the features on weekends due to not only extreme traffic, but work callouts for government employees disturbing national function.
You don't understand. Nintendo's dropping another console. I have to be there. I have to.
I know. I love it. I love that there was literally the cops are calling out of work. This is a problem. This is a problem. Our government is slowing down. Things aren't being done because they're too focused on Nintendo.
I love it.
And yeah, that's hilarious. So not only that, but the Super Famicom got the attention of a group known as the Yakuza.
Heard of it.
And the Yakuza would steal large amounts of them from trucks to resell on the cheap. And Nintendo had to specifically change their shipping to be at odd off-business hours and weekends to avoid theft from the Yakuza.
Now you know you made it.
Yeah, that's insane. So the Super Famicom quickly outsold competition, making the Sega be a forgotten name in Japan outside of arcades. And once again, Nintendo was put on the top spot. A huge part of this success was that the console was the fact that it had third-party developers that maintained exclusivity contracts with Nintendo. And these companies that decided, like, we're going to stick with Nintendo to make games were Capcom, Konami. Yeah, Capcom, number 1, huge. Konami, number 2, huge. Koei, number 3, huge. Big in America, in Japan, still to this day, huge. They're still, like, they make the Warriors games. So, like, I love Koei for that. But, like, outside of that, they're not huge in America. But, you know, they're around. I know. You know, number 4, Square. And number 5, Enix. So, you know, 5 big companies at the time that really that sold this console.
Yeah, Enix sucked though.
No, not this time. This was when they were giants. This is when Square. This is when Square was sweating.
Right.
Yeah.
Then they went to town. Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a different Lord.
Yeah. Like episode number 2. Number 2. Check it out, guys. So they would soon develop an American version of the console and call it the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or as we call it, the SNES. And it would be redesigned with a case featuring gray and purple coloring, and even change the controller's buttons to be gray and purple, which I think looks worse. But I thought that blew my mind as a kid to find out, and I felt super jealous as a kid when I saw a picture of a Super Famicom controller in Nintendo Power with the green and yellow and blue and red buttons. I was like, what? Like, why is mine purple and gray?
There must have been those coloring somewhere.
Yeah, like it's just like that was their branding. They even changed the logo for Nintendo for a little while in America to be that like that very 80s looking like lines, the black and gray. You know what I'm talking about? Like the 4 circles, the lines over it. That was their logo in America for a while to go with the Super Nintendo.
I mean, like the Super Nintendo was so big that they were trying to rebrand the whole thing. But
like,
no, don't do that one. Don't do that one. Don't do that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it worked. It sold in limited quantities on August 23rd of 1991, and to no surprise, it sold out immediately. This is again like same thing. Los Angeles and New York, only cities to get it at first. They're like, let's test the waters. Day 1 sellout. So like, all right. Full release. So a week later, or I guess 2 weeks later, on September 9th of 1991, they fully released across America. And in April of 1992, they sold in the UK and Ireland, which was the quickest European release of a Nintendo console, which has led to a huge Nintendo boom in the EU.
Hell yeah, way to go, taking over the world.
The system launched with a few games, but most of them, especially Super Mario World and F-Zero, which is a new title,
hell yeah,
would be huge successes both in sales and reviews, and they would sell for the rest of the console's lifespan, which is pretty rare for a launch game.
Wow, yeah, that is amazing.
Other launch titles included Pilot Wings, which used the Advanced Mode 7 chip featured inside the Super Nintendo, which allowed for 3D graphics to be displayed. Gradius 3 and SimCity were the other 2 launch games.
Oh, nice.
SimCity, love SimCity. But now that the Super Nintendo was out, what was the rest of the market going to do about this giant that just came out of the scene?
Gotta step it up again. You gotta keep. That's what it's all about. That's what you're supposed to do. Innovate.
Yeah. So we're on part 2 now of this episode, which is called the First Console War. So that's a term, console war, that we use today to describe 2 competing game systems that both try to get top of the market. 1991 was not the first time multiple consoles like advertised the same market, but this would be the first time that we would see 2 companies go head to head in all facets of advertising and game design in an aggressive level. Sega.
Yeah, that's just the regular.
Absolutely. It's kind of actually died now. Like the current gen, I think, kind of ended console wars. But
you're not wrong. There's a lot more cooperation.
Yeah, they're working together a lot more now than they ever were. Because guess what? You make more money that way.
Yeah.
But so Sega and Nintendo back then were rivals from the start. Back in the arcade days, they were button heads, and it now was fully transferring to the home console market. Their legendary rivalry was now going to be about securing dominance in the market of North America, and it would start with Sega. The Genesis would struggle to sell against the NES alone, not the Super Nintendo, the NES, selling 500,000 units by mid-1990. Super Mario Bros. 3 drove almost all people to Nintendo, despite having 16-bit advanced hardware on the Genesis at the time. Sega believed this was due to none other than that red-capped bastard Mario, Nintendo's beloved mascot. So Sega America decided they needed a mascot. And they very quickly came up with one faster than any other mascot. And this mascot had an attitude, Pat. He was for teen and young adults, and he was blue. And his name was Sonic the Hedgehog.
I was trying to think of another blue character, but I couldn't. And now I'm pissed.
You notice I emphasize words faster and quickly. Did you get it?
No, I had no idea.
Did you get it? Tell. Yeah, I didn't know. It was super subtle, I know. So yeah, this mascot with an attitude was meant for young adults and teenagers, like I said, over the young children that Nintendo marketed towards. And they would release his game, Sonic the Hedgehog, in June of 1991.
Hey everybody, do hard drugs. I'm Sonic.
That's no good.
No good.
This would be the first game to bring large amounts of people over the Genesis, with crowds praising its game design. It was very highly reviewed. It was one of the first platformers that let you go up, down, left, and right, and diagonal in every direction during a stage. It wasn't just left to right.
Loop-to-loops.
And loop-to-loop, yeah. So, and you got to go really fast. So seeing things move that fast when you're still in control was a new thing. So it did kind of, it blew people's minds.
With it.
Yeah. People were like, whoa! So a few months after its release, however, guess what came out in America? The Super Nintendo.
Boom. Big dick drop.
Yeah, so this rocked Sega's world. Sega had to come up with a plan to deal with this. What they did was they lowered the price from $250 to $150 for the console. Ooh. Which was the lowest console had ever been at the time in the market. Just imagine a $150 console today. Yeah, right. That's crazy. They would follow this with an extremely aggressive ad campaign against Nintendo. These ads are what led to what we call the console war, because advertisements showing images of Mario lookalikes being like as close to Mario as you could without copyright infringement, being knocked over by Sonic, showing characters like Donkey Kong being put behind bars at a zoo by Sega staff.
Oh my god.
And heavily implying that only little kids play Nintendo while men play the Genesis.
Oh yeah, it's the Andrew Tate of consoles.
It really was. By the beginning of 1992, guess what? The Genesis began to sell Sonic with the console because it was so popular. Originally, it sold the game Altered Beast, which I loved as a kid. I love that game. It's that werewolf platformer. I don't know if you've seen it. You're like a naked dude. You get a power up to into a werewolf. I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, I'd be a naked dude.
It was dark. The popularity of Sonic led to Sega allowing customers to mail in their copy of Altered Beast for a copy of Sonic the Hedgehog for free.
Oh my god.
So this actually worked, and this gave Sega the edge they needed. And with a hit game and aggressive ads, and not to mention a library of over 150 games at the time compared to Super Nintendo's 10,
yeah,
they finally were able to make a dent in the market. 3.4 million SNES sales by the end of 91 scared Sega. But their slow, yeah, that's a lot, and their slow rise was noticed by many third-party Nintendo developers, realizing that they weren't afraid to censor things, or to not censor things, and they just let things go out in their console as developers wanted to do. And they noticed they were selling well in America. Like, it was starting to get popular. Like, people liked Sonic and they liked this console.
Yeah.
So companies would start to break their exclusivity contracts with Nintendo.
Ooh.
The number one,
That's dangerous
the first,
for Nintendo.
It is, yeah. The first one was Acclaim, which not a big name today. Not a big today. I think they're actually just renamed. I think they changed their name, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But then we have Konami. They broke their agreement with Nintendo. Tecmo,
right, yeah.
So no more Tecmo Bowls, and a company called Taito. They were the little tomato icon. They're gone now.
Oh yeah.
Squaresoft remained committed to Nintendo at this time. They would not break exclusivity, and Capcom had a special agreement where they would keep titles that already existed for Nintendo only, but when they were making a new IP, they'd be on both.
Oh, that's the deal.
That's the deal to have.
A little loyalty and a little bit of not loyalty.
Yeah, Capcom thinking like, big brain.
It's polyamory. Right?
Yeah, it is polycorporate amory. Other companies would follow Nintendo Power's success and release game magazines, and these would be victim to the aggressive Nintendo and Sega marketing strategies. Due to Nintendo Power having only Nintendo ads, Nintendo actually wouldn't advertise as much in other US magazines, which led to them being dominated by Sega's advertisements, bullying Nintendo, often bashing Nintendo and saying their fans were babies.
No, we're not babies.
There literally is an ad. It's hilarious where you see Donkey Kong getting put in a suit.
Yeah,
and it's like white suit guys. It's like you just see their backs. It says Sega on their uniform. In 1992, Nintendo announced publicly that they were no longer dominant in the market, and they lowered the Super Nintendo to $149 to match the Genesis. What did Sega do? They lowered their price to $130.
Wow. What a like a middle finger.
What a Chad move.
So aggressive. Yeah. That really is. That's such a Chad move.
This was the same time that we saw the launch of Nintendo's infamous console in Japan only, the Virtual Boy.
Right.
This was a small 3D console that was like a red goggle thing that you would look into.
Yeah.
And children started suffering migraines and even allegedly seizures from this console. So it was.
Sega saw that and was just kind of like, try all you want. You are nothing now.
You can't evolve, stars. So yeah, they cut that product. Never came out in America. Taken off shelves in Japan. And also, just fun fact: this is the same year that Yamauchi, the president of Nintendo, would buy the majority shares of the United States baseball team, the Seattle Mariners.
Huh.
So, yeah. Fun fact, if you like baseball,
yeah.
The Mariners, the Mariners were owned by Nintendo. Cool fact.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah, can give you baseball. Anyone?
Dude, I love. Oh my god!
Why do you think that existed on Nintendo only?
Holy shit! The dots are connected.
Yeah,
around my brain.
because they owned the Mariners. Yeah,
best baseball game, Ken Griffey Jr. baseball.
It honestly was. It honestly was. I think because they were allowed to make it first party only, really benefited it. Like, it really made it better to other games. Like, they got to maximize the potential for the N64 on that one.
Sure. Oh my god, so good.
Yeah, so next, Nintendo has had a next big boost with the release of a hit arcade game, Street Fighter 2, releasing exclusively for the Super Nintendo.
Nice.
So, despite this, it was shown in the market report that in 92, Genesis controlled 55% of the console market.
Ooh, that's still big scary for Nintendo.
Yeah, so Nintendo was actually behind. They were losing to Sega in 92, which a stark comparison to 91, where it was 90% Nintendo.
Oh, that's a massive hit.
That's a huge drop.
Right hook to the jaw, bro.
Yeah.
Oh.
Super Mario Bros. 3 brought everyone back up, but then that faded. And it wasn't on Nintendo. You couldn't play that on your Super Nintendo. So next we talk about Acclaim. So Acclaim would produce a major hit game for arcades that took over America by storm. Street Fighter 2 got pushed aside for this new title called Mortal Kombat.
Oh yeah, okay.
And this was a product of Street Fighter 2 because fighting games weren't popular until Street Fighter 2 came out. All the titles that we know today, like Grand Blue, King of Fighters, Tekken, all those games are spawned right now. And that's because of Street Fighter 2 was so popular. People are like, oh, we can make one. And they did. And Acclaim made Mortal Kombat. And that one is the one that really hit that nerve in society.
Because it's so bloody.
Yeah, it was hyper violent. And this fighting game would be a prize looked at by both Sega and Nintendo. And Acclaim agreed both of them could have it for their console. But, like we kind of talked about last time, Nintendo of America has censorship issues.
Right.
So Nintendo of America would censor the blood and remove the fatality system, which is kind of like what the game was known for. So you could enable this with a cheat code in the main menu, but people didn't know that. People didn't know that. It was like a super hidden thing. So this made the game sell much higher for the Genesis. it would sell 3 to 5 times more on a Genesis. And it would have they would sell 6.5 million units total. And 70% of that was Sega Genesis sales.
Yeah, that's not good for Nintendo. Yeah, my parents were horrified of that game. That was one of the reasons why they hesitated doing anything video game related, was because of Mortal Kombat and stuff like that. They didn't want to scare me. So
that's exactly what we're going to talk about now, because the popularity of Mortal Kombat, coupled with the moral panics of the day, led to the first time there was major complaints from activists and angry parents to the United States government about video games.
Yep, that sounds about right.
So this led to the famous 1993 congressional hearing on video games that would be held in December 93, led by Senator Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl. The Senate Committees on Governmental Affairs and the Judiciary would bring in several industry leaders, including the Vice President of Nintendo America at the time, Howard Lincoln, and the Vice President of Sega of America at the time, Bill White, to discuss the way games like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap, which is another infamous game at the time, which was on the Sega Genesis CD, I believe, which is a live-acted game where you had, like, stop girls from getting abducted, and they were seen in their underwear often, live-acted.
Ooh,
so, yeah. So those are the topics of the big topics for Mortal Kombat and Night Trap, and how they were marketed towards children.
Right.
So the
video games.
Yeah, the whole thing was in an argument back and forth, never-ending finger pointing between the two companies, saying your fault, like literally, it's all it was. If you listen to it now, you can find it on YouTube. It's like the most childish. It's like listening to a Trump debate. It's like the most childish thing in the fucking world. The end of the hearing would have the Senator Lieberman state that they needed to come together with a means to regulate, or they would have to pass laws to do it for them. So the two companies actually did end up working together. And they would even form what's called the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or today, the ESRB.
Yep.
So this would be seen following the following hearing in September 94. They said that was enough, like they settled it. Like, your guys are good. ESRB is perfect. They based it off the movie rating system, so that's what we have today, Teen M, in America. It's different in every country. Like, they have PEGI in Europe, they have their own rating system in Japan. But, in America, ESRB is what we know. So now we're going to actually go to part 3. Nintendo, the Nintendo Sega console war is still going on, but there's just other things we have to talk about that no longer focus on it. So I'm switching the direction a little bit. We're going to go in part 3D. Do you get it? Do you get it? Part 3.
The era where I finally got to play video games.
Part 3D. Do you get it? Like 3-dimensional graphics. So also, I just want to make a point at this time. I was a Sega stan.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was nothing because I didn't have anything.
Yeah, no, me and my brother were like really into this. I want to also say I had both. We had a Sega Genesis and we had a Super Nintendo. I was lucky as a kid that my dad was obsessed with video games. So he loved buying the video game consoles. So we had both. Right. And he just loved collecting the games. Like, that was like one of his favorite things to collect. So we had both. And I loved Sonic the Hedgehog. It was the first game I ever played. So I think that kind of put me into like a Sega mindset as a kid. But I think I probably ended up spending more time on the Super Nintendo playing Super Mario World than any other game.
Right.
I
have a theory about like Nintendo games where like you can play Nintendo games longer than you can a lot of other console games.
Yeah, I mean Mario World also was a big, had that big open map. You could like walk around it and stuff. And that was so cool. I blew my mind as a kid. And Mega Man. Played Mega Man a lot on Super Nintendo as well. So like those are two games that I really got into, which is another big. We were talking about the exclusivity thing. It wasn't just Street Fighter that got to remain on Nintendo to make it popular. Mega Man too. Mega Man stayed Nintendo only, so that was big. Capcom was nailing it with Nintendo sales.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So anyway, go. What were you gonna say?
I'm sorry. There was a word I was trying to think of, and I completely forgot what it was. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Part 3D. Do you get it? Anyway, so at the same time of the 1993, Nintendo announced plans to develop a 64-bit console, and this was called Project Reality. And for the first time, it was able to.
All right, that's a little fucking.
Well, dude,
64 bits. Don't fucking get started.
Well, listen, it's because it looked real, Pat. Can you believe it? It looked like it would be real life.
No,
it was able to.
When I was a kid, I was like, "This doesn't look real." But
no, it looked real. It was fully able to render 3D environments and models, 3 dimensions, Pat.
That means real, yes.
Do you get it? Part 3. Anyway, so this was the joint effort between Silicon Graphics Incorporated, which they used to like the leader in visualization supercomputing efforts for like movies. And so they worked together with Nintendo, and they announced and unveiled this. They announced that this project would be unveiled in arcades in '94, and they announced it would have a home release in '95, and it would be launched at a price of $250. So the first major design change between this and the Super Nintendo was that the controller would have an analog stick, going back to the consoles of old, the old Ataris and the old Colecos with their joysticks. But the reason why they brought it back is this would make sense for a 3D environment. But they would also agree to keep the directional pad for either backup movement or extra game controls if people didn't like the joystick.
Right. Also, great decision. Love that.
Yes.
Decision. I always loved the N64 controller.
Yes, it's fantastic. It's awkward, but it's fantastic.
It's super awkward. So awkward.
It's a learning experience. Next, they would add the Z trigger, which used to be a trigger-like button on the bottom of the joystick, which would be intended for shooting and action games, which are always popular in America. And so now you could feel like you were actually pulling a trigger. But they would also have extra additional buttons in many other games as well, because, more buttons, the better.
Makes you feel like you're really pulling the trigger and watching a man die in front of you.
Hey, kids, here's a button to make you feel the kill. The C buttons were also added, which would be a second directional pad. But these buttons were simply meant for extra buttons to have more options in games that are being developed at the time, specifically Ocarina of Time.
Oh my god, yeah, it made
that is
good.
Why it exists, by the way. So on June 23rd of 1994, they would announce the Ultra 64, a new 64-bit fully 3D console that would be made with a group of elite 3D developers called the Dream Team.
And it puts puberty on you.
Basically, stay good, get out of here. This is the man console. So this team consisted of Silicon Graphics Incorporated, Alias Research Incorporated, Software Creations, Rambus Incorporated, Multigen Incorporated, Rare Limited, and Rare Coinit Toys and Games Incorporated, WMHS Industries Incorporated, Acclaim Entertainment Incorporated, Williams Entertainment Incorporated, Paradigm Simulations Incorporated, Spectrum Holobyte, DMA Designs Limited, Angel Studios, Ocean, Time Warner Interactive, and Mindscape. So
we are getting our powers together to create the ultimate console of the 90s.
The Dream Team was what the team was coined, and these were basically everything. I mean, I said Time Warner. So, these are everything. This is like, every studios from everywhere. Ocean, they're still a huge company today. Like a bunch of big tech giants are getting together to work on this thing because it was a crazy idea.
Yeah.
When the hardware was finalized, its design was solid. They would finally show the console off in Q2 of 1993. Showing images of the Ultra 64 console. I believe it was actually E3 it was announced too, the first E3. And its ROM cartridges would be shown too, not the controller yet. They showed that it'd have ROM cartridges, which was a interesting thing because other consoles at the time were showing CD-ROMs. And having indicated the possibility of using a CD-ROM, they decided on using a much faster but space-limited cartridge system. This allowed games to load way quicker, but they would have, less space. And this put them at odds with multiple developers, and something we talked about in the other episode, which this would cause the withdrawal of Squaresoft from Nintendo.
Right.
In late Q2 of 94, Nintendo made an agreement with Midway, Midway Games, it's like that kind of like Acclaim, they're the same kind of company. I think they're the same company nowadays. I think they're just called Midway now. Allowing them to make arcade cabinets for games using the Ultra 64. And these would produce two titles: the fighting game Killer Instinct, which is hilarious. I don't think they make them anymore, but those were hilarious games. I loved them as a kid in the arcade. And the classic racing title Cruisin' USA.
Hell yeah, dude! We have that actually here on the N64 right now.
Cruisin'. That song, love it.
Oh, yeah.
I loved that game so much as a kid. Console and arcade. I was a Cruisin' USA junkie. The console was revealed to be called the Ultra Famicom in Japan, and the Ultra 64 for the rest of the world. So during this time at Nintendo HQ, visiting Nintendo HQ, a designer we talked about earlier, Shigesato Itoi, visited,
That's right.
And he was now pretty famous for Earthbound in Japan, aka Mother 2 in Japan. And he was visiting Nintendo to take a look at the new console and work on a new game coming out, which was going to be Mother 3, never ended up happening, sadly, for the Nintendo 64. And he was visiting and talking about it, and he visited the headquarters. They were developing the Ultra Famicom. And he brought up the fact that at this point, since you sell more stuff in America than Japan, why are you having different names? And you should also probably not call it Ultra, because that's a too widely used name in the world. So they switched the name off of Itoi's recommendation once again to the Nintendo 64.
Yep. That sounds better anyway.
I love that Shigesato Itoi named the two of their biggest things ever made.
Yeah.
Is visiting. So once again, Itoi is responsible for the name that we have today, the Nintendo 64. So this was also the end of the name Famicom. So Family Computer was now removed from the nomenclature of Nintendo forever.
Womp womp.
So on November 24th, 1995, Nintendo 64 made its reveal in playable form at Nintendo's 7th annual Shoshinkai trade show, which was met with raving reactions, and reviewers were saying no game could ever look better than Mario 64, and it looked like real life.
Oh my god. Okay, fine.
Nintendo.
Again, I was a child and I was like, "This."
Oh,
this
me
doesn't
too.
look real, but
I didn't think it looked real. It looked like a cartoon, but it's just but it still looks crazy. Whoa,
Sure.
Nintendo Power websites would actually go down due to the heavy traffic over people loading onto their website because of images of the games of Mario 64.
That's not entirely surprising considering the internet.
Back then too, but that was rare back then for traffic to crash a site.
Sure, yeah.
This same year in Japan, a new game developer named Satoshi Tajiri would visit Nintendo, and he had the idea for a game to release called Pocket Monsters for the Game Boy, and they agreed. They said they'd make it, and it released in Japan with limited success. Nothing too crazy though.
Never heard of it.
No, never heard of it. The console war was still raging on, and not going well for Nintendo. At this time, Sega had already released the Sega Saturn, its 3D console, which was now crushing the Super Nintendo in sales. In November of '94, a year before the showing of the Nintendo 64, a new competitor entered the scene, Sony, with the release of the PlayStation. And this console boasted an impressive library of CD-ROM games and the ability to switch out discs for larger games, which released a month after the Saturn in '94. So keep in mind, this is when Nintendo 64 was being shown off for the first time. These were coming out.
Yeah.
So at long last, Nintendo would release their console the Nintendo 64 on June 23rd, a day after my birthday, so it's pretty big hype. In 1996.
That means that you're the chosen one.
I'm the chosen one, yeah, almost. It means you were so close to being the chosen one, but sorry, you just missed out. Oh,
no, we're gonna
dang,
kid
yeah. Don't talk about that.
Okay.
So on September 26, 1996, in North America, the game would come out. Sales would go through the roof in both regions, and despite announcing a launch price at $250, they ended up selling it at $200, or to be clear, $199.99, to compete with the market-dominating Sony PlayStation.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
Yeah, the N64 received fantastic reviews across the board and sold very well in every region, but it could not topple the PlayStation at the time.
Oof.
That same year, Yokoi would produce the Game Boy Pocket. This would be a slimmer Game Boy, which was much easier to carry around, and it was a huge hit. And I actually had the green Game Boy Pocket as a kid, and I remember I loved this thing because I loved the Game Boy, but it was too big. I couldn't bring it with me anywhere because it's a fucking brick, a giant chonky boy.
The OG one is massive.
Yeah, so this actually fit in your pockets. I was a Boy Scout when this was happening, and I was in Boy Scouts, and I remember getting the N64. The Game Boy Pocket, and having it with me at Boy Scouts because they would have put it in my pocket and bring it, kind of thing. I loved it. So after Yokoi made this, he would resign from Nintendo, and he would make a new handheld called the Wonder Swan, which never took off in America, but in Japan it was a very popular handheld.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it was a pretty popular handheld. It also had the first remake of the first Final Fantasy game on it, which sold it to huge amounts. Sega Saturn was the lowest seller of the 3D age, and though through its entire life in the USA, it would never do much better. This is the only Sega console I never owned as a kid, and it would, which says something about its popularity. I never knew a single person who had the Sega Saturn. Not one. Which is
so sad.
Yeah. Sega Saturn. This was Sega's fallout time. 97 was a huge year for the game industry. Just as the Nintendo 64 was just beginning to catch up to the PlayStation, it all fell apart for Nintendo. Because Sony released something. And that something was Final Fantasy VII.
Nah, Final Fantasy sucks.
We talked about this in the Square episode more, so we're not going to go into the big details of Seven's release. But if you remember from that episode, it was ludicrously big on release.
Yeah,
it was absurdly high selling, and this is actually credited for the death of the Sega Saturn. When Final Fantasy VII came out, Sega Saturn lost so many sales to everything, and they just stopped making games for it.
Oh my god, that's so sad.
And Sony was just back on top, and Nintendo was getting crushed by the sales of Final Fantasy VII. Which I love imagining the alternate reality where they went with the CD drive for the N64, because like I feel like it wouldn't have hampered it at all. Like they still would have had Mario 64 on disc. Like, it wouldn't have changed that, and they would have had Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, I mean,
like
the problem would have been, like they said, the load times would have kind of sucked.
Yeah, but would it have been? It would have been the same as the competition. Right, so like that's the thing. Like so that no one would notice the difference, kind of thing.
Yeah,
so,
and I agree because they ended up doing that anyway.
Exactly. So it's just like no one noticed that it would have been crazy. They would have had Final Fantasy VII. So PlayStation probably would have died. That probably would have been the end of the PlayStation.
Yeah, that was also like the product of the time because like CDs were coming out on everything now. Like DVDs were starting to become a thing.
The Sega Saturn was CD as well. So the Nintendo 64 was the only 3D cartridge console.
Yeah, which is great and cool, and I understand, but yeah, it's like in terms of marketing, it's like go with the future, dude. Go with the future.
100%.
Like, we're not going to.
100%.
Again, don't get me wrong. I still prefer the N64 over the PlayStation, but that's just because I didn't have a PlayStation.
Right? Yeah. That's true. I think I do.
I'm admitting my bias.
I had both, and I love Final Fantasy VII. Honestly, I probably preferred the Nintendo 64. I think I played a lot more games on N64 than the PlayStation 1.
Right.
So we have sad news next in 97. Gunpei Yokoi was in a minor car accident, got a fender bender, and when he stepped out to inspect the damage, a speeding careless driver struck him dead.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I was like, when you said it was a minor thing, I was like, oh, it's not tragic.
Yeah, he literally got out to check the dent on his fender, and a guy not looking just smashed into him and killed him. So Gunpei Yokoi passed away at the age of 56. Which ended his legendary status as a game developer and product developer, I guess. So yeah, that happened. He wasn't with Nintendo anymore, but still a sad thing.
Yeah, of course.
September 28th, we saw the beginning of what would change the whole world, not just video games, because Japan, a product from a couple years ago, finally started to take off, and with sales in the USA losing out to the height of the PlayStation, they decided to port this game over to America with an updated, less buggy version, and they would release in 2 different versions. Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue. So, when these titles released, it would be the start of the multi-billion-dollar franchise we know today. And while they were called Pocket Monsters already out in Japan, they weren't like they were big, but now it's like when it came to America, that's when it took off.
Bro, I bullied kids for not being into Pokemon, even though those kids bullied me for liking Pokemon. They were like, "You fucking nerd! You like that weird Japanese shit?" And I was like, "You don't? Fuck you!" Like, I was like,
don't know who this little yellow rat is, you freak.
Yeah, yeah. Like I, it was the one time I realized bullying was stupid because I was like, "I'm the hype, dude. I like Pokemon. I'm the hype." Like,
so besides being listed in the top 100 games of all time. It is the best-selling Game Boy game of all time, and the best-selling RPG of all time. So fuck off, Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, look. We all have, like, my favorite franchise is Zelda, but I'm like, when somebody's just like popularity Pokemon versus Zelda, I'm like, shut up, it's Pokemon. Like,
yeah, 100%.
It's always Pokemon.
It's the second. It's the second selling IP in the world.
Yeah,
in the entire world, above Star Wars. So like you can't argue that Pokemon's pop. Like it's Pokemon. It's great. I love it. I mean, we both are fans. You know, we grew up during
Pokemon
this time.
Is a fact.
It's a fact of existence.
It's a fact. Yeah, like.
So children were ravenous at this time. And like I just mentioned, both of us can attest to it. We were both caught up in this. For this new game and the wonderful world that it was so easy for people to just play and fall into, get immersed into this world.
I've never been immersed. I wish I could get immersed like that now.
100%. Same. Like, it's just something that doesn't hit anymore. Like, back then, like, you were just, like, you felt attached to your little digital buddies fighting these people.
I feel like it's only because I have other things I have to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and that's always in the back. Like, whereas, like, when I was a kid, it was just like, I mean, I got to go to school, but I'm just going to play more later. And that's nice. Whereas nowadays, like, I have too many fucking games.
100%. And also, like, I remember going to school and bringing the booklet, the instruction booklet of the Pokemon games. And, like, my friends would bring theirs. And we would, like, show each other the stuff. And, like, look, they show Alakazam. Oh, like it was so, you know, like we were so into it. Yeah.
The OG artwork
with the faded colors, like the white, the high white highlightings. I love that art. Love it to death.
They also like they look a little bit like I don't want to say meaner, but they look
a little more real.
Yeah, I guess that's the best way to say.
Yeah,
because like
they're a bit more
goofy.
They're a bit more
like,
animal.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Actually.
So yeah, you know, a subsequent anime release as well that we all know. You know that released. A popular trading card game came out, and these all brought more attention to Nintendo and and the Pokemon games. You know, like the trading card game didn't. You know, that's not a Nintendo product, but like it sells a lot, and that makes people want to play the game. You know, it's all connected, so they would sell more Pokemon games. And I'm not going to go further into this because that's going to be an episode. So we'll do a Pokemon episode later for sure. We're not going to go into the depth of this world. It's probably going to be the next like game history or design episode I do. I'm sure it's going to be Pokemon.
It probably should be because it's one of the biggest.
Yeah, it's also got a crazy fucking story. The origin of that is intense.
Oh, cool.
So with the release of Pokemon, Nintendo climbed to the top of the charts again, and their household name was secured. On a month later, on October 13th of '98, we saw the release of the Game Boy Color, releasing only a month after Pokemon released, which would prove to be a very popular product, allowing you to play your games in full color with the same battery life as the previous Game Boys. This combined, I had a teal one, the cyan one. What was your color?
I had a purple one. See-through?
My brother had the purple. I never had the see-through one. No,
I had a see-through.
We got them at launch before there was the see-through ones. So I never got a second one. So.
You got an OG though. That's cool though. I might have had a way cooler looking one. Suck it.
Which I was jealous of my friend's purple see-through one. So, which I want to point out too. Actually, I put it in my notes and didn't put it in my script. The N64 and Game Boy Color were the first time consoles came out with color versions. Like the fact that you could get a different color N64, like a clear plastic one, or or an orange one, or a blue one with a Pikachu tail on it. Like those were like. That was insane, and that was a huge hit with people. People would buy other console, they would buy a second N64.
Yeah, so speaking of that, I have the standard black N64. It still works to this day.
Me too.
I love my old reliable. It's fantastic. But when the Pikachu one came out with Hello Pikachu, the game that came out with it, I remember asking my mom for a second N64, and I remember her like laughing in my face, like, are you insane? Why would you need a second one? I was like, because it's Pikachu. Okay, never mind.
It's got Pikachu on it.
She shamed the shit out of me.
And you've never recovered from that for this day.
No, that I understand wholeheartedly. that one, I look back and I'm like, oh yeah, of course not. I would have done the exact same thing. Traumatized my kid for maybe like a month or two. Who cares? It's fine. They'll get over that one.
Also, just on the live stream, the Pokemon Lo-Fi kicked in as this was starting. Like it hit literally as we were talking about it. It's just Nintendo Lo-Fi playing. I
think I know the one, yeah.
So, the Game Boy Color launching at the same time as Pokemon basically made that, common match made in heaven. And also it worked. Right. You could see color in Pokemon on the Game Boy Color. Each town was named after a color. Pewter City. Yeah.
It was the laziest version of a colored game.
Yeah, but it was cool because it would have the screen color would change to the color of the city at times, which was cool.
And also, when you booted the game up, depending on what direction you pointed the control pad, it would actually change the color of the entire game. So you could change the game to like different filters, which I always loved it because there's a blue one I always picked. There's like a blue filter I always put on.
Yeah, I always used the green one. That was my favorite, the green filter.
That was a good one. Yeah, I always thought that kind of looked like a little bit like baby shit, so I didn't pick it.
I think it's because Bulbasaur was my favorite, so I was like grass version that didn't exist, you know. So I was like, favorite. Yeah.
As a kid, I always picked Squirtle. That was my go-to. Always.
I've switched to water type over time, but you know, anyway, we'll get into that in the Pokemon episode. Yeah. So on March 21st, 2001, Nintendo would release their next console, the Game Boy Advance, and this was the most powerful handheld of all time. This Game Boy would house identical hardware to the Super Nintendo, almost identical, I should say, making it able to play games at Super Nintendo quality, just slightly more pixelated and with slightly worse sound. This would enable a large library of ported Super Nintendo games to be on the Game Boy Advance, which would allow it to have older hits to be played again, which is pretty easy software to make, and it worked. People bought them. Like, you could play Link to the Past on the Game Boy Advance, you know? Stuff like that. So they would just come out again, and people just bought them. People bought them by reselling your stuff for the first time, really, in the game industry like that, and it worked. If only they do it now. Anyway, not long after we would see the next major Nintendo release on September 14th, the Nintendo GameCube came out in Japan of 2001. So we're going to talk a little bit about this development. This is a purple cube-shaped console, and they actually started developing it in '98. Under the name
the standard one was purple.
Yeah, it was purple. I have a black one.
Oh, ha!
Yeah. So, but I never had the purple one. They came out with the black one and silver one at launch, but that was only American launch. Japan launch had just the purple one at first.
Oh, crazy! Yeah, because I always, for some reason in my head, obviously it's just silver. I'm like, yeah, it's the silver.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, it's actually purple.
Yeah, my dad, like I said, collected games, and he wanted games, and he was a sports fan. He loved sports games, so he bought the black one because the black one was the Nintendo GameCube Sport, and it came with a Madden game. So that was why we had that version. And I remember all my friends they all had a different game, I think, with them. I think Luigi's Mansion was in the rest of them. Just the Sport one had Madden.
I never got Luigi's Mansion though.
Oh, maybe not. Maybe the version. I don't know. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it didn't even have a game with it. I don't know.
Maybe it had Mario Sunshine.
No, that was late, way after launch. So.
Oh, okay.
They didn't always come with games, so it might have just come late with that one.
That's fair. Yeah, that's a good point. I might have just had a standard. Yeah.
So yeah, they announced it in '98, the development of it, and it was called Project Flipper, and it was revealed at E3 2001. I love the name Flipper. That's why there's a lot of ocean themed stuff, by the way, for the GameCube. Yeah. It's because it was called Project Flipper, like the controller, the wireless is called the Wave Bird, you know, and stuff like that. There's a lot of other stuff like that too. This purple shaped cube console would have mini discs, and a potential CD replacement at the time, the mini disc, fell out of fashion very quickly.
Oh yeah, the only thing that has mini disc is that game.
They were in the market, like buyable, and like, oh, you could use them in these like brand new video for mini disc. Like they're so compact, you can store more. They were in the market for like a year. By the time the GameCube came out, they were gone, which is pretty hilarious to look back on.
Like it's basically like that's what they're for now.
It's like they tried to get what they missed with the CD-ROM, like the new thing, and that was the new thing in that month, and they went all in and swing and a miss.
Don't get me wrong, I love the GameCube, but the PS2 took a huge shit all over.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about that very soon. So yeah, it did have a much more advanced control on the N64 as well. The C pad was replaced with the C stick. It had the shoulder buttons became big, chunky shoulder triggers.
Yeah.
I love the GameCube controller. One of my favorites still to this day.
Me too. Yeah.
In September 2020...
I'll ruin your fucking face in Super Smash Brothers Brawl with that thing.
I believe you. In September 2020, so just recently, we got to actually see the internal Project Flipper development files.
Oh, cool.
And the original design showed the Project Flipper being a handheld console with a screen on it that looked like the Game Boy Advance. And it had a second console called the dock that you would plug into your TV, and you were able to play the Project Flipper in Game Boy mode, or you could plug it into the dock and it would transfer to your TV. Does that sound familiar?
Wow. That's crazy, actually. How early that was.
That was the 98 design. Anyway, moving on, it shipped 500,000 units to retailers, which would eventually sell out in Japan, and even lower stock to the point they needed to push back its September release date in America to November because they need to make more consoles. So they would ship 700,000 units to America. Unfortunately, despite the console selling well in Japan, this would be the first Nintendo console failure in the American audience.
Womp womp.
Reviews say the GameCube looked childish, and it lacked the graphic prowess of its major rival, the PlayStation 2, and the newcomer on the scene, the Microsoft Xbox.
Ooh.
Time International magazine called the GameCube a quote-unquote unmitigated disaster for Nintendo.
Wow. Jesus Christ.
The games that came with the console on launch, however, were very high rated, which basically led to the sales were almost 1-to-1. There was one bought for every console bought, which means that they drove the sales entirely with the launch titles.
Wow.
Firstly, the most popular was Luigi's Mansion.
Yeah, that was a great game.
Yeah, this game was so popular, and even today, it's praised for how unique its gameplay is. Like, it's a very different style of game. It's really good.
Oh yeah.
Secondly, we saw Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2: Rogue Leader.
Dude, I have that still. I play that when I'm really sad.
It is. That's a weird vibe. But this title was not only really popular because it's from Star Wars, but it was a very good arcade flying game. But again, today, still, it is so good today.
I'm definitely going to stream that eventually.
And it was one of the most graphically impressive games on the GameCube, if not the most still, by the end of its lifetime. It looks gorgeous today.
It does look good.
You can if you guys use Dolphin Emulator, you can download this game with a modern day graphic mod, and it is insane looking.
We don't condone that though, legally speaking. So
legally speaking, though,
you could do it.
You could do it.
You could do it. You shouldn't.
Yeah, legally speaking, don't do that, but it exists. Thirdly, we have Wave Race Blue Storm, which was a follow-up to Wave Race 64, which was the highest-selling sport game within 64, even above Ken Griffey Jr. Baseball, believe it or not.
Unbelievable. I don't believe it.
That's because it was a launch title. That's the real reason why. Well, Wave Race was great, but Blue Storm, I actually never played. This is the one launch title I didn't have of the GameCube, and I'm sure it was fun. I loved Wave Race 64, so I'm sure it was cool. A few months later,
I never got any of the launch titles because I didn't get the GameCube at launch because I never got any goddamn console at launch.
I know a lot of my friends did as well, so I'm not like unique in this case. So I do acknowledge that I am different because I had a dad who obsessively wanted to collect them. So when they came out, he got them.
Right.
You know, like so that was the case.
Well, that's good because that really does give you that like extra. I was there, so like your word carries more weight.
I appreciate that. I also think it makes it why I'm so critical on games because I played so many when they were new.
That's fair.
So a few months later, in 2002, Hiroshi Yamauchi stepped down from president of Nintendo after over 50 years, creating the company what it was. So, you know, hats off to Hiroshi Yamauchi and everything that he did to Nintendo. He would pass away in 2012, I believe. 2013 he died. So,
well, thank you very much. Your legacy lives on with all of us nerds.
Yeah, he's the father of Nintendo that we know today. So, good job, buddy. And he handed over the reins to Satoru Iwata, who we all, you know, he was a great guy. In 2004, Nintendo announced a new handheld that would be unrelated to the Game Boy. And this console would have two screens, and it would fold in a clamshell design like their previous Game & Watch units. The top screen would be able to render full 3D graphics at the level of the Nintendo 64, while the bottom would be able to have a fully working touchpad. This would be called the Nintendo DS for dual screen. And honestly, if you've noticed, everything we've talked about had a weird, like, techie sounding name. This is the only one that actually launched with it.
Yeah,
like they could have named it something like, you know, the Nintendo Game Boy Super or something like that, you know what I mean, or some new name, but it really got it's like dual screen. It's got two screens. That's what it is.
Dude, I love the DS. I had a DS Lite, a pink one. I had a pink DS Lite.
You're a DS Lite guy? I never had one.
I was a DS Lite guy.
We'll talk about that soon too. The dual screen released on November 21st of 2005 in Japan. 2005, is that right? I think I put the wrong date there. I think it's 2003 it came out. And it would again be a handheld to skyrocket Nintendo back into the homes and minds of the people. And what this console did, it would sell 18.75 million units, which is great.
Wow.
Maybe it was 2005. I think it was 2005 it came out. Definitely was. 2005. Yep, November 21st, 2005. It did release. I'm wrong. So despite the failing GameCube, the 18.79 million units sold definitely helped Nintendo out a lot. And in 2005, the GameCube was estimated by Nintendo. They thought it would sell. Their launch projections was 50 million units by 2005. So when 2005 hit, it had sold 22 million.
Okay.
So for the first time, Nintendo didn't make their mark, and the Xbox
that's a shame.
Beat out the GameCube, selling 24 million copies.
They had a pretty insane release, though.
They did, and there was a newcomer, a new kid in the block, and it was cool. Granted, that's almost entirely America, not the rest of the world.
Yeah.
PlayStation 2, however, as you mentioned earlier, would blow these guys both out of the water with a seemingly impossible sales number, cementing its place today still as the top-selling console of all time at a whopping 155 million units sold.
It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, like, the big seller was that it was a DVD player, too.
Yeah, it was cheaper than DVD players.
I had, like, one of the reasons why my mom and sister picked one up was because it was a DVD player. They got it for two reasons. The DVD player and Dance Dance Revolution. And then when they got bored of Dance Dance Revolution, I got the PS2.
Yeah, and it's a great. So yeah, you're right. It was a DVD player that was cheaper than most DVD players at the time.
Yep.
So that was a big sale. Also, the games that came out for it were huge. It had a lot of massive hits. Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy X.
Call of Duty started
there. Killzone started there. Ratchet and Clank on Uncharted was 3. What was the Naughty Dog game? Jak and Daxter. That's what it was. Jak and Daxter started there.
That's my one. Yeah, that's my game.
Yeah, he had a lot of big PS2 titles. So, killed it.
And Star Wars games were on there, too.
Star Wars games, too. Yeah, a lot of them. So, Iwata, at this point, decided he was going to reorganize Nintendo's divisions and designers from the bottom up, giving most of the resources of the company behind two legends. First, Shigeru Miyamoto. He would have the most responsibility in Nintendo as a game designer at this point. He would be given most of the resources. He's, of course, famous for being the creator of Mario, and he's just kind of seen as, like, Nintendo's dad at this point.
Yeah.
A lot of people think he owns Nintendo, which is never, ever the case, but that's just, like, an assumption people make.
Because he's the guy.
Yeah, he's the guy. He's always so happy, too.
It's true.
So, secondly, was I want to know, do you know this name? Takashi Tezuka.
It does sound familiar, to be honest.
He's a lot less talked about, but he was the designer behind the legendary franchise, The Legend of Zelda.
Oh, yeah. That's probably why I know it then.
So he's a Zelda guy. So he was given, another large amount of resources to make the largest projects for Nintendo in the future. The same year, we also saw the first public retail store for Nintendo open up, the Nintendo World Store at the Rockefeller Center in New York City. This store also is somewhat of a Nintendo museum today. Super cool. I've been there myself. I recommend visiting it if you're there. They have the original Hanafuda cards on display.
Wow.
Which is cool. Which, by the way, are still printed. They never stopped. So you can buy them. Yeah, you can buy them. You can order them on like Amazon and stuff, and you can buy them there. They sell remakes of the original ones in that store.
That's so cool.
You can buy the original cards. So, yeah. There's a bunch of different ones now. Of course, they have like a lot of Nintendo-themed ones, but they always come up with different decks. That's why there's like Mario playing cards, too. Like, you see, they sell a lot of playing cards and like board game stuff, and now you understand why. Like, that's where they're from. Yeah. It actually makes more sense they do that than anything else. At E3 of 2006, in that May, they showed off their next console, the Nintendo Revolution. And this system would revolutionize the game industry, as it was a slightly stronger graphical power than the GameCube, but it was shown in a sleek white design. And the Tokyo Game Show that same year, they showed off the controller, shocking the public with disapproval because it looked like a TV remote, and it used motion sensors to control their games.
Yep.
Critics,
but I loved it.
Fucking
I wanted it so much.
Hated it. Critics were like, how could you do this after GameCube? Like, don't you know your market? So that same year, we saw another huge Nintendo release, the next DS console, the Nintendo DS Lite. This was similar to the Game Boy Pocket of Eld, being a lighter, more sleek version of the DS. And it was the biggest complaint before with the DS was that its clamshell design, even though it was able to fold in half, it was just too bulky. which I agree.
Yeah, it was huge.
And this was rectified, and the public noticed. The DS, as I mentioned before, sold 18.79 million units. The Lite, 93.86 million sold.
That's where it's at.
So that was a big increase, almost 9 times as much. It's a lot of increase.
Dude, these handheld consoles are keeping Nintendo afloat.
Yeah, that's what's doing it. I mean, look at what they have now. So, in mid of September 2006, a press conference held in Tokyo, New York, and London revealed the final version of the new console, named the Nintendo Wii, and it would be sold on November 19th in 2006. Get this, in America, to later be sold in Japan on December 2nd.
And they sold out so fast, and like I remember my mom, this was like the first time my mom was like, I'm going to get you a console on release. And I was like, no way. And she was so excited to do it. And it didn't happen. I don't think I got it for a year and a half.
It was like the PlayStation 5 now. Like how hard it was to find. They were so popular.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was an American release, which was a huge step for Nintendo because they make their money in America, and Nintendo of America is worth more than Nintendo. So that's their thing. So they released it in America first, Japan second, and the rest of the world third. And it sold so fast, like you mentioned, what many people predicted to be a cheap gimmick paid off in dividends when the people clamored for the Wii. Nintendo designed the Wii for casual gamers and families, going back to Yamauchi's idea of old, saying Nintendo console next to every TV in their living room. Which remember we mentioned that last time. Yep. That was the design goal for the Wii. And they made games like Wii Sports that took off so fast they couldn't even print the CDs fast enough.
Love it.
That's, think of a more family game than the Wii Sports. Seriously. This was Nintendo's biggest break since the N64, which sold 44 million units. The Wii would sell 101 million units.
Woo!
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So the competition at Sony and Microsoft were caught so unaware that there was a demand for this kind of product, and they wouldn't end up working on software and hardware like this until 2009, which is when we got the PSI and the Kinect and stuff.
And they were not good.
No. They were whatever, but they weren't. It was too late. Too late.
Yeah.
On September 17th, 2007, we saw Nintendo officially close their forums. The Insider forums, and N, like Nintendo, Insider forums, which were the last remains of their helpline days after a reconstruction of their website. So rest in peace, Nintendo helpers. On November 1st, 2008, we saw the Japanese release the Nintendo DSi, a new DS Lite console with a camera on the inside and outside, which was seen in America and released in April 2009. It wouldn't prove as popular as the original DS, as the DS Lite, but it would sell more than DS originally at about 20 million.
Oh, cool. Okay.
The end of the Wii age would see it sell more than the previous Nintendo's best, like I mentioned, the N64 at 44 million, which led the Wii to be the current fourth best console sold of all time.
Hell yeah. Good job, Wii.
So now, we're getting to our last part of the episode, the modern times, which is a little wrap-up, basically. We're basically done. We're catching up.
Yeah.
There's no like deep history to go into at this point. It's basically just numbers and bullet points. Like it's just development stuff. It's also factory made nowadays. There's no cool stories to tell about it. Unfortunately. Right. The 10s started off with 2011 for Nintendo when they announced Project Cafe. Soon later revealed to be the next HD console to replace the Wii U. This console had a controller with a screen on it that could be used as a large handheld as well, and able to run HD games with modern graphics. The same year, we saw the next proper handheld release, Nintendo 3DS.
Love it. Still have mine.
Love mine too. Still got it on my shelf. This was a major release, as it was a whole new DS system hardware that was able to hold GameCube level tech, as well as audio stereoscopic 3D, which means you didn't need 3D glasses to see 3D effects.
Yeah, that wasn't... I think that fucked with my eyes a bit. But
I had it off the entire time. So it was a huge success with great reviews. Sold 74.95 million units. Not quite as high as the Lite, but pretty close. And it would test and review better, however, with what's considered the actual gamer, quote unquote, crowd, not the casual game crowd.
Are way better.
Yes.
I loved, one of my favorite Zelda games is Phantom Hourglass, but I liked Link Between Worlds a lot.
Link Between Worlds is fantastic. Not to mention, Pokemon X and Y and Sun and Moon that came out on it, which
I never beat Y, but I have it.
They were both huge, and because they really introduced online like ranked play and like online community for the game for the first time, like tournaments. So that really it boosted it huge. But yeah, Fire Emblem too. There was a lot of really big 3DS games that people loved.
They even had a Smash Brothers game come out on it that was actually pretty good.
I played it. I played that more than the Wii U version for sure. It had also had Animal Crossing New Leaf.
That's right.
Which was the first Animal Crossing in a long time that people cared about. So that was a huge seller for 3DS.
Yeah.
So the Wii U, however, wouldn't meet such a great fate. This short-lived console released in November of 2012, and while it received praise for the gamepad controller and improved online functionality, it was criticized for its poor interface and low battery life. Oof. Not only that, but it had a very weak launch game lineup, and an extremely confusing marketing campaign. When people were surveyed later, they simply thought it was an add-on for the Wii they already had.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
For the longest time. My friend had one, and I was like, "Oh, this is a different."
I was in the same boat. I was in the same boat. I remember when it was announced. I'm like, "Oh, it's like they're like a handheld tablet for your Wii." That's kind of cool for people who like the Wii. It's weird they're not coming out with a new console. It turns out it was. It's just. So this came out in 2012 worldwide. It would only last to 2016 with a 4-year lifespan, and it sold 13.56 million units, which made it the lowest selling Nintendo console of all time.
Well, hopefully the next one does better.
Yeah, hopefully. I think it might do pretty good. The high sales of 3DS, however, kept them going until October 2016, when the announcement of a new console, the Nintendo Switch. This console was what the Wii U failed to be. A fully handheld dockable console that was able to play games seamlessly on handheld or a large TV when you just simply plugged it in, switching to TV mode. The design pattern from 1998 we talked about.
Yeah.
Another big change was the return to ROM cartridges to the system, which again, if you have a ROM cartridge game compared to the digital version, you will notice it loads faster.
Yep.
And this would end up releasing on March 3rd of 2017 with a major launch title, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. And it would go on to sell 906 million units.
Wow.
No, that's not true. 9.6 million units.
I was like, no.
9.6 million units.
That's not right.
That's too many. No, 9.6 million units in its launch year. And Breath of the Wild would be on Switch and Wii U. It would end up selling more units than the Switch itself. People at launch, it sold 800,000 units. That's the Switch did, and then they sold 1.49 million units of the Breath of the Wild.
It took me 4 years to get a Switch.
Yeah, but you got it, and you got Breath of the Wild for free eventually.
Yeah, hell yeah. And I'm currently playing a run where I haven't died yet.
Oh wow!
I'm doing a no die run.
Do you die? If you die, do you restart? You leave the save?
I'll probably just continue with shame.
Oh, okay. So eventually Breath of the Wild would sell 28 million units too. So that's pretty great. We're going into game sales now because we're done with consoles. We're up to the modern time. So we're just going to go, I'm going to go every year what the big title was and what the sales were.
Right.
So the first launch, we had Breath of the Wild at 28 million units sold. The next year, we would see the Switch dominate again with a massive hit in 2017, Super Mario Odyssey.
Right.
Which would sell 23.5 million. So not as high as Breath of the Wild, but big still.
Yeah, still big.
2018, we got the giant Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which would sell higher than Breath of the Wild at 28.17 million units. Another year, another giant. As we saw the 2019 release of Pokemon Sword and Shield, which would be the first Pokemon main title to be on a console, which would sell at 23.9 million units. And to end 2019 and to end our talk about Nintendo today, we had the release of Animal Crossing New Horizons, which broke sales records for the game at 37.62 million copies sold.
Wow. That's amazing. What, to me, that like video games have become such a part of the mainstream culture that people who probably would never have gamed in the early 2000s, like when you and I were really getting into gaming with like the Super Nintendo and the N64, like the late 90s, early 2000s, that era, there were so many people who probably never would have gotten into games at that point who love games now, like Animal Crossing, like that, because it's such an appeal.
Yeah,
because it's not violent.
There's two sides to this. There's two sides to that. One is you're right. And the reason why you're right is because it stems from the Wii. When they launched a console that wasn't for hardcore sweaty gamers, it sold more because there's more not hardcore sweaty gamers than there is. So, so that introduced a lot of people to things. Like you were even saying your sister and your mom played Dance Dance Revolution on the PlayStation 2. Exactly. Granted, that's not Nintendo. It's still, that's introduced, that you're playing a video game.
Concept.
You know? And so the Wii with Wii Sports and all that stuff introduced all these people to Nintendo products. And they really liked it. And stuff like that. The Game Boy 3DS and the Game DS Lite, same thing. Then their handhelds had games like New Leaf, which sold, almost as high as New Horizons. Like it's just like they had these casual games that everyone can play, and games like Animal Crossing where you can just keep going back to it day by day, do your chores, go on with your life. A lot of the people prefer that over sweating over Call of Duty. You know what I mean?
Sure, exactly.
And so it's just casual. Selling the casual game market is more successful because there's more people.
Yeah.
I don't consider myself a sweaty gamer anymore. Like I play games like Animal Crossing. I don't, but like I do. I like them. I play them for a small amount of time and then get tired.
You play them, enjoy your $60, and then move on.
100. Yeah, I can't keep doing it like a second job, but I enjoy the game when it comes out, and I never feel like I lost money. You know what I mean? I enjoy my $60, like you said.
Exactly. That's the regular way to play games. There are games that you're into that you will always go back to. There are games that you play, you go pat it on the head and go, thank you very much. And there's games that you go, why did I fucking do this? And that's it.
Or consoles.
I'm looking at you, League of Legends.
I'm looking at you, Wii U.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's the end of the Nintendo history. We're caught up. We're here. Also,
I loved it because I love Nintendo because I'm a shill. I love them.
I also just want to point out that another reason that like Animal Crossing New Horizons was such a big hit, just the third reason, pandemic.
Yeah.
It's like you came out at the same time.
You do inside.
It was a game you could connect easily with friends of all types of friends because again, it's so casual. You could play at home and do this fun little building thing casually. Spend your time with it. Like it came out at the perfect time.
Yeah. I guess I'll go down to the town square and see all my good friends today.
I'm gonna go shopping.
Meanwhile, outside it's just like there's 1 million deaths in COVID.
Car on fire in the streets. Telephone line falls over.
A lot of happened, dude. There were like cars on fire. I'm not gonna say where I live and dox myself, but there were cars on fire everywhere near where I lived.
That's very weird. I don't think that's normal, dude.
I'll tell you about it later. But anyway, Nintendo.
That's the end. We're done.
Thank you so much, everybody. I loved these episodes. I love Nintendo again. Anything Nintendo related, I'm usually like my ears perk up a little bit extra for. So
yeah, I also want to I have a plan to do for the future. I want to do a Zelda episode to be the Atlas version of the Zelda episode, which would be
like do development
the development side of things, and Tezuka and all his crazy stories.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to go into it too much, but I love his inspiration for the initial Zelda. It's something that like means the absolute world to me, and that stuck with me ever since I was a kid. And I'll leave you there to get ready for the next episode of Lore Lords, which is not going to be that. Something totally different.
Different. We're working on it, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming by. I hope you like listening to me rant about stuff. Have a good night.